The future of progressive radio. This is the Dean Obadala Show on SiriusXM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live right here, Monday, March 4th, in studio. He's still here. Shermichael Singleton, contributing host of Vox Media's. He's a Republican strategist. Really nice guy. So, Shermichael, nice to see you again. Thank you for being here. Thanks for spending time. Let me ask you, what's your overall, before I play some clips.
Sure.
We just had CPAC. What was your takeaway as a Republican watching the clips you saw from that?
I used to go to CPAC. I actually have not gone since Donald Trump has been elected. And I just think it just further shows how much American conservatism has changed. Even if people disagreed, as you stated earlier, with conservative dispositions, just as I would disagree with liberal dispositions, because obviously we're ideologically different.
Right.
We're disparate. This is just, I don't know how to explain it. I mean, I truly think we saw the death of American conservatism. We've heard people talk about it, but I think listening to the president's rhetoric, listening to the speeches of some of the individuals there, for me, it solidified the death of American conservatism. And all I can hope for is a sort of a phoenix moment at some point. No, seriously, that's all I can hope for. And my hope is that there are enough good people around to sort of revive it into something worth surviving.
I want to play a clip. This is Matt Schlapp, who's the head of the organization that runs CPAC, talking about embracing nationalism at the event. And this is just all Trump's doing. This shows how you had others, Rick Tyler, a Republican, say it shouldn't be called CPAC but TPAC for the Trump Political Action Committee. I want to play this quick clip. This is clip number 3 of Matt Schlapp.
The theme today is America First. What is the message, Matt?
The message today is we're going back on this question of, some people say, well, is CPAC all just about President Trump and MAGA? And we're taking a step back and asking what actually makes America great. And what we believe is that going back to foundational principles of the Constitution, which includes securing borders, it includes embracing the idea that America is a nation and there's nothing wrong with nationalism.
So there's nothing wrong with nationalism, and he means Trump nationalism, which is a different type of nationalism.
Well, yeah, I actually wrote an article for The Hill, I believe a week ago, in defense of nationalism, and I defined it based off of Stanford's definition of nationalism, and I go into different forms of nationalism, and what you hear often articulated by Donald Trump is ethno-nationalism. That is different.
Right.
That is to say that if you are white, particularly a male and a Christian, then you somehow have rights, if you will, to certain things because of your identity, because of the culture is defined by you. At least that is what they believe. That is a very different thing. That is a thing where people like you and I cannot exist, at least as equals. We're sort of second-class citizens. I cannot be for that. That is not conservative. That is reactionary. Edmund Burke, the conservative philosopher, wrote that we reform to conserve, meaning that if you are a conservative, you understand that if you are attempting to preserve, going back to the root of conservatism, translated from Latin to preserve, if you are seeking to preserve certain aspects of society, culture, traditions, norms, etc., you have to adapt because you understand that modernity is an innate part of human nature. To go backwards does not recognize that. And that's the problem that I have with Donald Trump. That is why I think I and some other folks, George Will, Bill Kristol, say this guy is not a conservative.
So the origin of the genesis of conservative is the idea of preserve?
It is. It is.
That's very interesting.
It is. So liberals,
I didn't know that.
And I don't have anything against liberalism. I think both are necessary. There's a necessity to the two.
Can you play the liberal friend card?
Well, I mean, I just think that
Meadows.
There's an old saying I'm sure you've heard, right? Iron sharpens iron.
Yes.
And as a conservative, how am I to know there is any truth in what I believe if I don't have someone who equally and strongly believes something that is disparate from my own or from my own beliefs that allows me to challenge the presupposition of those beliefs? It is impossible to know that what I believe is true unless someone's challenging me on that. And the same applies to one who is a liberal. And so I appreciate those who have differing views from my own, but I do not appreciate the extremism of conservatism any more than I appreciate extremism on liberalism, because I do believe that when you get into extremism of any of the isms, you get into a place where you start to say that certain individuals' beliefs are more important than the beliefs of others. And that is problematic to me.
All right, so let's talk about something else. By the way, you weren't at CPAC, but we had the show before me, Michelangelo Signorelli, they went.
Mm-hmm.
And they said it was the smallest crowd they've seen. He goes every year, even though he's a liberal, he goes the smallest crowd. And what they noticed anecdotally is that the Never-Trumpers didn't go. You know, obviously,
of course,
and libertarians didn't go. So that's why things did not look as crowded as it has in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And does that mean that, and I said this long before polling, it's like a year ago, I kept saying Trump is the GOP and the GOP is Trump. Now it seems to really have manifested truthfully. Has the GOP itself now contracted that whoever is left, that's why Trump could say, I have 90% approval rating? Because people like you, even though you're a Republican, you're not in this world that is, I have no idea the sample size of the poll, but you're not actually part of the GOP under Trump.
No, because I think the GOP under, well, okay, for some time now, and you know this, Dean, I guess this go back to the days of Newt Gingrich, and I worked on his campaign. I think he's a great intellectual mind, although I don't agree with many of his positions today. Conservatism has sort of gone through intellectual neglect for a long time now. I think you would agree to that.
Sure, why not?
I think under Donald Trump, however, you have seen the manifestation of problems that people have been pointing out with the American left, or American right, rather, for decades. And so, yes, Donald Trump, Trumpism, if you will, does define the Republican Party. I think if you were to ask, what does it mean to be a conservative? I personally believe it would be very difficult to articulate what that is. And even Sir Roger Scruton, who's considered the most renowned conservative political theorist and philosopher alive today, they compare this guy to Edmund Burke, the quote-unquote founding father of Western conservatism. He wrote a beautiful article a year ago for the New York Times titled, What Donald Trump Doesn't Understand About Conservatism. And in this piece, he goes on to discuss essentially that what Trumpism represents isn't conservatism, because the very idea of preserving things, Donald Trump disrupts. Our institutions, he doesn't care. You talk about norms and traditions of the presidency, he doesn't care. He doesn't care about any of those things that, again, traditionally, one who is conservative ought to care about.
So let's talk about a couple other speakers. I'd love to get your reaction.
Sure.
Here's Candace Owens, and she's a Fox News regular. She's involved with Turning Point, the big PAC, and here's her speech at just a little bit of her speech at CPAC, and let's hear clip number 4, please.
First and foremost, stop selling us our own oppression. Stop taking away our self-confidence by telling us that we can't because of racism, because of slavery. I've never been a slave in this country. Stop telling us that we need to be obsessing over our past when we should be obsessing over our future and the potential that we have.
So what's your reaction? Candace Owens obviously is African-American, if people don't know her. Shermichael is as well, if people don't know him. What's your reaction when you hear her telling a crowd that's primarily white this? Is it troubling at all?
I know Candace very well.
All right.
And I do speak with her actually relatively regularly. And, people always ask me my thoughts on her. And I think I can say this without disrupting our friendship. I do not always agree with her.
Right.
Even as my friend, I don't. And when I don't, I will text her and I'll say, hey, I don't agree with this. I think you're missing something here. And I think in that statement, I do think that she is missing a couple things, and she would disagree and say, no, Shermichael, I'm not missing. And that's okay. I respect my friend's right to differ. But I would have articulated something different and differently. And I'm trying to say that while being respectful of my friendship of her. I don't believe in maligning my friends in public. But I would have just said something very different, Dean.
If she was giving that speech to an all African-American crowd, I think it would have been different. If she was speaking to specifically that community to say, hey, look, we have to stop talking about this. But when you tell a white crowd, and this is CPAC, and I jokingly call it the Caucasian Peoples of America Convention.
I saw that tweet.
Right. And so there are some people of color, I imagine, less this time than in the past, but I don't even know. But obviously it's primarily white people. When they're hearing someone go, hey, there's really no racism, let's just get over it. Let's not talk about reparations or slavery or Jim Crow. I fear, and you tell me what you think, that it gives them a sense that, hey, things aren't bad for black people. That was in the past, and let's move on. And these same people, Republicans, show they believe white people have more discrimination now than African Americans in actual polls. I've talked about it from the show in the past. White men who are conservative, not white liberals. I fear it feeds into that, so that they don't care when there are reported instances of discrimination, institutional discrimination, or random acts of discrimination. That's my concern. What do you say, and I ask you as a conservative, but as an African American, about that?
American scholar Richard Weaver, who is now deceased, who was a conservative intellectual in the early 1900s, once wrote that ideas have consequences. And I believe that ideas have consequences. Again, if I were talking to that audience, that would not be my message. My message would have probably been an attempt to allow them, or make an effort, I should say, for them to understand the grievances, particularly of African Americans being an African American,
right,
and trying to connect those grievances to the presuppositions of conservatism, so that there is a connection there. That would have been my process.
Sounds
Her
like
process different.
Sounds like a good process. I like that, because then it resonates, because you're putting it in the framing that resonates with that audience. And if you're trying to get a message through, I mean, if her message really is, and this is her choice, if her message is, hey, discrimination's gone, racism is gone. I mean, the headlines were, Candace Owens says racism is gone because she's not a slave. She's never been a slave. That was a little reductive.
And I don't think that
right. But that
she meant that. I strongly don't think that she meant that. But that was
the headlines on left-leaning publications everywhere.
I know.
So I'm like, well, when I listen to the clip, I'm like, it wasn't as simplistic as that. But my concern is always the listener. And if I'm speaking to a Muslim American audience and I'm Muslim and I'm being critical constructively, it's one thing. If I'm doing it to the public and everyone in the audience is not Muslim and I'm telling you how bad Muslims are, I'm just saying it's not the same speech, but it's a different, the audience you're giving the speech to, I think, is important in these contexts.
The misuse of language causes social disruption. When you misuse language, when you misuse what you are attempting to communicate, you can have unintended consequences. I always believe that. That's why I read so much. That's why I remember so many of these darn quotes.
That's
I do
good,
it for a reason.
I like quotes too.
Because I recognize how important words are and how important communicating, particularly to different people who may not completely understand the grievances or the cultural dynamics of a different group of people. That is fundamental to understand how important that is. So again, as I stated, I would have stated things differently.
So I'm chatting with Shermichael Singleton. He's a contributing host of Vox Media and a Republican strategist. I want to play another clip for you. And to me, Michelle Malkin's a short clip. And why I'm playing that is because, sadly, to me, Donald Trump's currency is cruelty, and it's being embraced by this clip by her and those in the audience, not all, but some who gave it a standing ovation and cheered for essentially mocking the ghost of John McCain. So here's clip number 5.
Cities have metastasized, and both parties are to blame. And yes, I'm looking at you, retired Paul Ryan, and yes, I'm looking at you, Mitch McConnell. And yes, I'm looking at you, Bush family, and yes, I'm looking at you, the ghost of John McCain.
Listen to the cheering. Why? Why would you bring up the ghost of John McCain?
Well, I mean, that was a very ignorant statement. I don't know if she wrote that speech herself or if someone else did. I don't even understand what the premise of that statement even was. I'm just being honest. Like, intellectually, I don't understand what she was attempting to say.
Well, you forget what she was saying. To pick on John McCain's ghost, he's only been dead, 6 or 7 months. I mean, what is going on? The cruelty, to me, that's just cruel. I don't care what you're doing. It's just cruel. Forget left or right. That's just cruel.
We are the beneficiaries of this thing we call America. We all are. Whether you're native born or you've immigrated into the country, we are the beneficiaries of it. And the way we conduct ourselves gives a great indication not only of where we are at a particular moment in time, but what we value about the future and who we hope to be in the future. And I think if we begin to embrace things that are filled with hate and void of love and compassion and empathy, then you will continue to see the continuance of Donald Trump. And I think that's what that example and that applause indicated to me. And again, that is why I continue to say this is not acceptable. And there has to be more conservatives saying we have to change this dynamic. The reality is, Dean, the American left, if you will, to use that political term, they are winning across the board. They're winning with younger voters, younger Americans, are winning with minorities. The future looks good for them. The future does not look good for the American right, because we have failed to articulate what in the world do we stand for. If you're marginalizing people, they're not going to listen to you. They don't care about what you say. I think it was Jack Kemp, the former congressman, who stated, I believe in the early 90s, that it doesn't matter how great your ideas are. If people don't believe you care about them, they automatically tune you out. And the American right has been tuned out by an overwhelming majority of the American people.
I recall we were on Reverend Al's MSNBC show a few weeks ago, and you sort of made the point about the GOP had this plan to reach out to African Americans, and clearly
what happened?
What happened to it? And I don't. There's nothing in CPAC that if you're not, and I didn't watch much of it. I saw some clips and I read who some of the speakers were. If you were a Muslim, you were not wanted there. They had Frank Gaffney, one of the leading anti-Muslim bigots out there. He's a horrible guy, and others talking about radical Islam, not about threat of white supremacist terrorism, which killed more Americans last year than radical Islam, but it doesn't matter. That's what they're doing. I don't know how you would feel welcome if you're a Muslim when you listen to Candace Owens. If you're a conservative African American, maybe you connect with that. But if not, I'm like, why would you want to be a part of that party? And Michelle Malkin, if you don't like cruelty, then why would you join that party either?
Again, conservatives have failed to articulate why people should consider embracing conservatism. That is a fault on our own lack of due diligence, if you will. And as the country continues to become diverse, and I continue to talk about this, I've written about this, the dynamics do not look great electorally or politically for Republicans.
Right.
They just don't. I mean, why would you vote for a party that embraces this kind of stuff?
I know I wouldn't, but all right, let's take a break. When we come back, a person on Twitter had a question. What do you think of Diamond and Silk? So when we come back, we'll find out what Shermichael thinks of Diamond and Silk.
Oh, boy.
But we'll talk about some more serious things. I'll play a clip of Rick Tyler on MSNBC Sunday, touching on what you said already.
Great point.
And we'll come back and chat about that and more right here on the Dean Obeidallah Show.
The Dean Obeidallah Show.
Whoever's the next president, we should call him the 45th president of the United States. And this will go down as a dark time in America that we'll never refer to again.
SiriusXM Progress. to the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM Progress.
And welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live Monday, March 4th in studio. Shermichael Singleton, he's a contributing host at Vox Media, and see him all the time on MSNBC doing a great job there. You see him all the time on CNN, but now on MS.
You're right.
Do you go back to CNN?
I haven't done CNN in a while, believe it or not.
Yeah, I haven't been on CNN in a few months. I used to be on all the time, and then things not.
But I love CNN.
Yeah, I like CNN. I write for CNN Weekly. So no, it was just interesting. So, do you have any opinion on Diamond and Silk? The woman on Twitter was serious. Says, "What's your opinion? You think it's just for show? I mean, they get speaking gigs. I assume. I don't.
You know, when I used to do some work with Armstrong Williams.
Oh, I've seen Armstrong here. Yeah,
he used to have them on his show kind of regularly. And look, I always try to have an open mind to say that there is room for everyone. But then people will say, well, Shermichael, does everyone mean this type of foolishness, if you will? Maybe not, right? Like I'm more of a big picture type of thinking guy. I think about the long haul. I think about all the nuances, all the details of everything. That's just the way I am. And I think that when you're in politics, when you're in policy, when you're on television providing analysis, particularly now, we can't afford for people who lack an in-depth understanding of what they purport to believe. And maybe that's the nicest way to answer that question.
You just sum up Fox News. That's the entire time. To me, I am far more troubled with Ann Coulter than any day with Diamond and Silk. Like, it's funny, like, people might bring up Diamond and Silk. I think they've made a career choice. It's working out fine. They defend Trump.
Yeah, but let me tell you why I don't like it. Because
no, it's fine. But I'm saying Ann Coulter to me demonizes people.
Well, she does, but Diamond and Silk, they're also.
Do they?
I think as an African American, certain things like that, I do become a little concerned because I don't like the notion and the idea that people can essentially make caricatures out of black people.
Oh, okay.
And
I see that.
I can easily see how some can when they view them on television or when they watch their show. And that to me is very problematic because I think
fair enough.
There's been a lot of time in American history where people have made jokes about African American intellect and our intellectual faculties and abilities. And I think when people play into those tropes and those stereotypes, you're playing into a history that I don't like, that I don't like to remember.
You're coming at a different point of view. I understand that completely. There's a Muslim guy who's on Fox a lot. I call him the in-house Muslim there. His name is Zuhdi Jasser.
I didn't go that far now.
No, he's an in-house. I'm not saying he's a house Muslim. He's the in-house Muslim.
Okay, just making sure.
At Fox News, right? But there might be a subtle reason that I said it that way. But in any event, so I debated him once, and it's so funny. Like Zuhdi he's a smart guy. He's a doctor. He served in the Navy. Like, I wish he was a progressive Muslim because this is a guy who served in the United States Navy as a doctor, was an officer, and yet he parrots their garbage all the time. And I met him once, and we talked. I'm like, you're hanging out with the worst anti-Muslim bigots. He goes, no, that's done. I'm not doing that. So he actually, not because of me, he got so much pushback from the community. But then we were on Fox News, and he was saying ridiculous things to me, and I thought he'd gotten better. I'm like, Zuhdi. I'm like, you. I said, I was on with Jesse, what's his name? Jesse Waters.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Jesse Waters was a genius. And I said to Zuhdi's like, accused me of being like a drunk Islamist. I'm like, how can I be a drunk and an Islamist? I'm like, you make no sense. I'm like, Zuhdi, you're a punchline. I said right on TV.
Under some people's commentary, it should be, this is a joke.
This is like, I'm like, you're a punchline, Zuhdi. I said, you have no following in our community because because he was up bemoaning and they don't follow me because I speak the truth. I'm like, no one follows you because you're a punchline. We don't like you in our community because you've made a choice to saddle up to the people who are demonizing our community.
You know why I've always been very, very careful with my articulation of conservatism. My grandmother, who has a PhD, used to always tell me this growing up. She would say, and this may be true for your community, but definitely for the African American community, when a person becomes successful or they're doing great things, everyone in the community, even folks who may not directly know the person, say, wow, that's Shermichael or that's Dean. Wow, we're proud. He's from our community. And she always used to tell me, she still tells me this to this day, you need to remember that. You need to be conscious of that. So whatever you write, whatever show you're on, TV or radio, always have that in the back of your mind that what you say is representative of our community. You should never embarrass the community. And so I go to great lengths to make sure that I sort of protect that, if you will. And perhaps some people don't really find that as valuable.
And I know what you're getting at. That's,
it's frustrating, right?
At times, because sometimes, I might want to say something. Like we were earlier, some people were calling up and defending Congresswoman Ilhan Omar over her latest comments. And I was saying to me, I know her a little bit. We're not buddies, but I just interviewed her recently in her office. I was in D.C. for a few days, and I've interviewed her a few times before that. And we spoke after the interview, and it's so funny. Like a month ago, we were talking about how much she said, I'm reaching out to the Jewish community and trying to build more bridges, and she is. And I'm of Palestinian heritage. I want allies like Congresswoman Omar. I'm so frustrated that she's hurting herself and destroying the credibility that I want her to have in articulating positions for my community. And I'm also frustrated that we're fighting over, she's made the fight over, is it anti-Semitic or not, as opposed to, here's Benjamin Netanyahu's policies that I have trouble with. Here's the policies I want to talk about, settlement construction. My family lives under occupation in the West Bank, which is true. And they have roadblocks and checkpoints and less freedom of movement. I want people to hear that. And because of her comments, which are not framed well, this last one is just
some of them are just ignorant. I'm just going to be honest, Dean. I just do not agree with some of the tweets I've seen coming from her.
The latest one, and it was not in a tweet, the latest one, it was in reporting. I wish there was audio so we could hear it fully explained. But, the quote by reputable reporters, I just wish I could hear the whole thing, was that she was saying about some people having like foreign allegiance to foreign governments, stuff like that. And I can tell you, as a Muslim, I've heard people on the right accuse me, you're not loyal to America, you're more loyal to Islam. That's a painful comment. So if you're Jewish and you're hearing that and you think that's directed at you, I can understand that being very, very painful and very wrong. It's also, if your goal is to try to help the Palestinian people with self-determination, you're not helping. That's what's so frustrating to me about it.
No,
too.
she's not at all. She's hurting her own cause.
Where we're losing.
And losing a lot of allies.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of allies.
So that's what makes it so frustrating. So it's funny, like she's trying to do the right thing and it's not coming out well. And I can't speak for her. I'm not going to pretend to speak for her. But as someone who's been doing this for a longer time than like in the media, when you're talking about difficult issues that are emotional, you have to navigate them with a sense of care. And Twitter's not the place for the Middle East conflict.
That's a novice mistake, I would say, and it also makes it difficult for people to actually trust and believe her when she says, I'm reaching out to the Jewish community, and then you make statements like that are caught either on or off the record by legitimate reporters, and people say, well, wait a minute, we attempted to give you the benefit of the doubt, and 2 weeks later, how do you explain this?
So that's part of her work is to explain herself, build relations.
She's going to isolate herself, and
she
should take heed to some of the things you have stated. She is not doing this proper. There are some folks there that have been in the Congress for a while, and if I were her, if I were to advise her, I would sort of go and seek counsel from some of those folks to figure out how to articulate, as you said, the complicated things and the nuances of the settlement issue and what's going on in that region in a delicate way, and she's not doing that.
Yeah, and she comes in and as a Muslim woman who's African American as well, African, she's African American, but she's African, and that already there's some people who are going after, and she's liberal and everything. So
the deck is already stacked.
No one's saying any opportunity.
No one's saying she should bow down. That's not what I'm saying. Despite the deck being stacked against her, what I am saying as an African American man is that you need to learn how to navigate this situation better, and she's not doing that.
I'm going to reach out to her people and say, let's talk. We got to have a conversation about how this works.
Dean.
Let's talk. Rick Tyler was on, and Rick Tyler's a longtime GOP strategist, activist.
Rick,
So I want to play this clip on MSNBC yesterday about CPAC, sort of echoing what you were saying a little bit more. Let's hear clip number 6, please.
CPAC used to be, the confab of conservatives who would get together once a year and It's not CPAC anymore. It hasn't been since 2016. It's now Trump PAC, and it should be TPAC, because the people there they talk about pro-terrorist, anti-justice, anti-law enforcement, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, pro-Russia, pro-autocrat. I mean, it's unrecognizable what Donald Trump has done to the party and what he's done to the conservative movement, and CPAC, which used to be the flagship of the conservative media. It's a real shame.
Before I ask Zerlina, can I just ask you, what can be done to resurrect the Republican Party as it was, or is that gone?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, rest in peace. No, it's over.
Rest in peace. The GOP is over.
Oh, that was
Shermichael,
direct.
is it over?
I mean, as I stated earlier, I mean, perhaps I was a bit more esoteric than Rick, but I agree with his statements. As I stated earlier, Dean, I do believe the GOP has to sort of go through a Phoenix type of revival, if you will. You know, it's crazy when you think about isolationism and you think about some of Trump's positions on tariffs, tariff wars, etc. I'm so reminded by the Wealth of Nations, which the conservatives who are strong supporters of capitalism and the free market are extremely against. I mean, how is that conservative? I mean, again, Rick pointed out in a couple of seconds all of the things that conservatives were once for. We once understood that immigration was good for certain industry, agriculture, for example. And now all of a sudden, this is a horrible thing. This is a horrid thing. I believe it was sort of libertarian conservative economist Milton Friedman who said, I believe back in the 70s, free trade is great. It's great for the American consumer. If the consumer can buy a good that's going to be cheaper for their pocket and allow them to do more things with their money for their family and their community, why is that not a good thing?
So I don't know when you have this Phoenix moment, but what I do know is that the GOP and conservatism, they might overlap, but accidentally, it seems like, because it's whatever Trump wants, the party now moves to his calling,
which is
whatever
not
it might be. Right. So that's what I'm saying. Like, so going forward, what will the GOP stand for after? At some point, Trump is gone.
I don't even think it matters when he's gone. I think he's still going to be around. I think he has redefined the Republican Party for a very, very long time. And even Michael Still, former chairman of the RNC,
good guy. I've had him on.
He and I were talking about this a while ago with Bill Kristol months ago when we were out in California at Politicon. And Michael said that Chairman Still said that he believes that the Republican Party will probably go the way of the Whigs. And I've thought about that for months and months and months. And I think there may be some truth to that. We're looking at a base in the country that is a reoccurring, or not a reoccurring, but a constantly decreasing size of the population, meaning white men. When I worked on Romney campaign back in 2012, we had data that suggested that for the first time in a very long time, white Christian men who are the GOP's strongest base of support are steadily decreasing because the country is becoming more and more diverse. So is that to say that the Republican Party will steadily decline as that particular group of people decline if they don't figure out a way to rehabilitate themselves with the rest of the country? I think the answer to that question is yes.
Very interesting. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the national emergency. Yesterday and more today, we heard there's 4 GOP set votes in the Senate. So they're going to vote to overturn. It'll go to Trump for the veto. I want to talk to you about, I'm old enough to remember Republicans calling Obama a king and an emperor and
executive order. Remember
for
that?
DACA and DAPA. He was a king. I wrote about it, a tyrant, all this stuff. And I am astounded by what we're seeing now. So I've got to get some insight from our friend Shermichael right after this break right here on the Dean Obeidallah Show.
The Dean Obeidallah Show.
Voting is the most important civil right of our era because the right to vote preserves all other rights. It's not the Second Amendment. It's not guns. It's voting.
SiriusXM Progress.
You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, Sirius XM's Progress.
And welcome back. Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live right here Monday, March 4th, talking to our friend Shermichael Singleton, who you see all the time on MSNBC. He's a Republican contributor. So, Shermichael, as I was mentioning, I'm old enough, because I was here 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, that Republicans went ballistic when President Obama signed DACA and DAPA, which was for the parents. DACA, we all know, is for the kids, and it's still in effect. And they called him a king, a dictator, emperor, Obama, all this stuff all the time. And these same Republicans, most of them, not all of them, are supporting Donald Trump's declaration of national emergency, which is far different than, because Obama wasn't allocating money with DACA or DAPA. You actually have Donald Trump allocating $6 billion that was not appropriated by Congress.
This is far worse.
Right, this is worse.
This is far worse.
This is like just Yet we have, so now we have a fourth member of the Senate today. That's Paul. What you needed to go. And Paul said today or tonight, he thinks up to 10 Republicans might vote. And I hope they do vote to send a message. It's not enough to overturn the veto. Why, though? Why are not more Republicans like Justin Amash, the congressman from Michigan, who put it point blank, I railed against Obama when he did this. How can I support Trump doing this? This is absolutely wrong. So he was one of the 13 in the House to vote with the Democrats. Why are we not? Why is this not a no-brainer?
It's all political, Dean, and you've been around politics long enough to know that politicians, their first concern is the self. They're concerned about self-preservation. Can I win the next election? And if you're a Republican, Donald Trump, I think the most recent poll indicates he maintains 88% approval within the Republican Party. You're going to look at those numbers, and your staff is going to tell you you would be out of your mind to vote against this if you're one of those Republican senators, where I believe there's 18 or 22 Senate seats for Republicans up for re-election in 2020. Folks around you are going to say you cannot risk challenging the president on this, because if the president tweets something about you, well, we know what's going to happen. You're going to lose your seat. So I think these folks are thinking political. They're thinking about being reelected and not about the health of the country. But it is extremely hypocritical. And I'm concerned because you set a precedent when you do this. If you allow Donald Trump, which the founding fathers, we were just talking about this on break, they were very, very clear about the legislative branch having the purse strings, the money. They did not want an executive to be all yielding in power. That's essentially a king, right, who can do all things. We did not want that type of system, which is why they separated the branches the way they did. And to allow this, honestly, Dean, from my perspective, is literally a trample upon the Constitution. We might as well rip it all up, because it doesn't mean anything.
No, I agree, and you're not being overly simplistic. If a president can just allocate money any way they want for any issue they want, even when Congress said no, then what is the point of having checks and balances? What is the point of separation of power? The president becomes a king who comes in and says, I don't care what Congress says. Hey, guess what? AR-15s are gone. I'm going to spend $25 trillion on Medicare for all. Good luck, America. I'm going to be sitting out here on vacation.
And I would not like that.
Right, so I'm saying from your point of view, and clearly you can make a more compelling case that gun violence is a national emergency when it takes 30 lives a day and 90 when you include suicide, that a gun's involved every day. That's a much more compelling argument than the wall.
Well, I agree. And, look, I'm an avid gun shooter. I have a carry concealed for D.C. I have a carry concealed for Virginia.
What about New York?
No, New York is a little more challenging. Right. But when I'm at home, I do shoot literally every week at the gun range, every week, and I'm pretty good. But as a gun owner who owns a couple of firearms, I don't have a problem with waiting. I mean, I'm really not. And I'll tell you, being an African American where there is a large number of handgun violence in our community, more than anything. I mean, the assault rifles, that's one thing. But when you tally up the number of young black kids, particularly young black males that are killed by a hand, that's a serious issue for me. And so I am okay with trying to figure out a way to properly reform this thing while not restricting the Second Amendment right that we all have. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. As long as it's not too much encroachment, I'm okay with it.
You're unreasonably reasonable. This is very, I don't like this at all. Your tolerance is intolerating to me. It's aggravating me. I don't know what's going on. Sure. So what would it take? This is pure speculation, but I'm going to put you on the spot because you're a Republican strategist. No, it's not a hard question, but we would need, not you, we on my side would need 20 Republican senators to come over to remove Donald Trump if the Mueller report was so compelling. There's impeachment in the House and we have the trial in the Senate. What do you think? I don't think just obstruction of justice is going to do it.
Nope, I don't think
What
so
do you
either.
think? Is there anything you think, like if Mueller report came back, and it's unlikely, but just found a smoking gun of Trump colluding with the Russians, just assume that for this argument, do you think that would be enough to move 20 Republican senators?
So for argument's sake,
right, exactly, purely for that.
You've read enough about Nixon, right? And remember, Republicans were with him for a long time until the tapes. Until the tapes, there was something tangible.
Gun. Right.
If, for again, argument's sake, if the Mueller report came out and said, we have bank records that show people connected to Vladimir Putin gave Donald Trump $500 million, that is something tangible where I think Republicans would have a very difficult time standing behind Donald Trump. You have evidence now that people can actually see.
And they can also say, we're going to give you Mike Pence as president, so it's not all lost. Let me ask you, as a true conservative and not a Trumper, would you be happy with Mike Pence as president?
You know, look, I know some people are probably going to disagree with me on this. I actually like Mike Pence as a conservative.
I'm sure you would. I wasn't kidding. I assume because he's a real conservative.
I know people have issues with some of his religious beliefs, the sort of religiosity of his conservatism. And we have a system and a process to check and challenge those things. But if you look at his policy records outside of some of the flaws, he is a conservative. He is a conservative. The guy is not perfect. None of us are. Again, there are areas where he can be checked. And again, we have systems in place to do that. But I would be more happier with him because he respects the institutions. And I think for a lot of people, they would say at least there's some normality to what has now been lost under the age of Trump.
And I think he would actually be more effective, although Trump has been effective in certain things and delivering on certain things.
Yeah, he has.
And I think for the left, I could tell you Mike Pence, they both are a threat in different ways. For Pence, is the religiosity, as you put it, the idea of, I call it Christian Sharia law, and that he wants to impose on America. And I've written about it, and that's what he wants to do. And the hate for Jesus crowd troubles me to no end. I used to be on CNN with Aaron Burnett all the time, and Hogan Gidley, we'd be on a debate all the time. And I'm like, no hating for Jesus. That's not, I'm like, I'm Muslim, but I know what Jesus is about because it's part of my religion. And he's like, I don't hate for Jesus at all. And to my community, Mike Pence, like Franklin Graham, some of these guys are really right-wing hate group leaders when it comes to the LGBT community more than anything else. And other things, it's more mainstream conservatism. We can deal all day. Like if our biggest fight between me and the right was more regulations or less regulations, higher taxes, lower taxes, that would be beautiful. I would love that because that's what we should do, as opposed to debating what is racism, what is sexism, what is bigotry, what is this country supposed to stand for. I mean, when you hear, you were just talking about when you were in college at Morehouse that your teacher's like, I want you to be the smartest conservative, most intellectual conservative out there. And you're remarkable. When you hear, but you also talk about Diamond and Silk, furthering, in your view, at least a stereotype you didn't like. When you hear Donald Trump call Maxine Waters low IQ and mock other African Americans as dumb and intelligent, to you, is that Donald Trump just being Trump, or is he playing on a meme that certain people on the right of white supremacists, frankly, have as it's trickled over?
I don't think. I know for a fact. I mean, if you look at the history of white supremacy, as I was saying, there are these characterizations of African Americans being intellectually inferior to white Americans. That is a fact throughout the history of this country. And I think it's a part of Donald Trump playing into something, and I think he realizes that. But you know what? It's so funny because Donald Trump tweeted about Spike Lee, who went to Morehouse, his speech, and I tweeted something to the president. I retweeted, I believe, that tweet. And I said, it's funny that the president's talking about another person's ability to communicate when I believe he communicates on, a 4th grade level? I mean, he communicates lower than 15 last U.S. presidents. So this is the last guy who should critique anyone on their ability to be a great orator when he lacks that in many, many ways. So look, I think he knows what he's doing, and I think that's what turns a lot of people off about him. Look, I'm a conservative. Do I like the fact that there are more conservative-leaning justices? Of course I do. Do I like the idea that we're deregulating certain industries? To a minimum, of course I do, as long as it doesn't become reckless. Sure, those are good things. Do I like having a solid military? Of course I do. But the character matters. The character cannot be replaced. Donald Trump has not done anything, from my perspective, that another conservative president could not have accomplished. There's nothing remarkable about his presidency.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely
and that's what bothers me about Republicans, at least many of those who are like his most ardent supporters. It's like, what's so great about this guy that a Jeb Bush could not have accomplished, or Marco Rubio could not have accomplished? Point out that one thing for me. And they can't.
I could tell you what it's the idea of putting minorities in their place. That's what he's delivering to them.
Well,
something you might disagree, but to me, to our side, that's clearly what this guy's all about. The idea of, NFL players, how dare you take a knee, you stand because I tell you to stand. Black people, from Don Lemon to Jay-Z to Maxine Waters, are all suddenly dumb and unintelligent and low IQ. And Charlottesville, I mean, the idea of anyone, there's no good side. So to me, what I put together is a man who is truly a white supremacist, but not in the sense of like burning a cross on a lawn type of white supremacist. Literally in that he in his mind views white people as superior. And he might be the Kipling's white man's burden.
Well, let me be clear. I don't know.
We don't know what's in his mind. I'm telling you what I see.
I want to be clear that I don't know what's in the guy's mind.
I had Geraldo on the show, and I was like, I know Trump, and he goes, I don't know what's in Trump's head, but I know what's in his lips, Geraldo, and it's Trump. We got to go to a break. We'll come right back after this.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127. Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back. Dean Obadala Show. We're live right here Monday, March 4th, talking to our friend Shermichael Singleton. So Shermichael, last thing, we only got a couple of minutes here. Any advice for Democrats as we get closer to 2020? We have like a minute and a half.
I mean, look, I think the Democratic Party, while you guys may be enjoying what's happening with my party, I think the Democratic Party has to be careful with its own internal conflicts. You got to be careful with how far left you go. Green New Deal sounds great and maybe aspirational, as you said. I don't think it's realistic. Free college for all, it's not. You have to pay for these things. You got to pay for it somehow.
We have free high school.
And Dean, you got to pay for it. And,
right. No, there's ways you can do it.
And
we're going to get Mexico to pay for free college education. What are you talking about? That's our plan.
I'll say this. I'll point to this example. A Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was on Jake Tapper's show a couple months ago talking about all of these free things. And he said, well, you could tax the rich to wazoo. You can cut military budget. It still won't be enough. There's still $20-something trillion remaining. She couldn't say anything. So I'm going to tell my Democratic friends, be careful with that, because if not, Donald Trump will be president again for another 4 years.
And Shermichael doesn't want Trump as president, by the way, so he's trying to give us advice.
I'm trying to help you guys so that I can help rebuild my party.
Right, so he wants us, I get it. Shermichael, thanks very much for coming in and spending an hour with me. Folks, thanks for tuning in. Where are you on Twitter, by the way?
Shermichael_.
It's just Shermichael_. I'm at Dean Obeidallah. Of course, Twitter, also Facebook.com/Dean of Radio, or drop me an email, dean@deanofradio.com. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you tomorrow night right here on the Dean Obeidallah Show.